So the missionary I want to talk about today is a bit different from any of your regular sort of cross-cultural missionary. I want to talk about Reverend Richard Johnson, who was the chaplain who came to Australia with the first fleet back in 1788. So let me tell you a little bit about this man's story. Richard Johnson was a Yorkshire man from country England, where he grew up on a farm. He was educated at Cambridge and became ordained in the Anglican Church not long after that, and he was a vicar at one stage, and then he went into chaplaincy. And when he was in chaplaincy, he became friends with John Newton and William Wilberforce, who were two kind of big, big names and heavy hitters in the Christian world at the time. John Newton is still known by us very well today as the author of Amazing Grace, the song, who was a former slave trader and became a Christian and then became ordained as well. And William Wilberforce is known as the man who saw the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire, because of his persistence as a politician to bring that about. Now, John Newton and William Wilberforce were friends with this young man, Richard Johnson, and they wrote to William Pitt to encourage William Pitt, who was the Prime Minister, to send Richard Johnson to the colonies as the chaplain. We actually have a letter preserved from John Newton at the time about the kind of person it would take to be a chaplain in the colonies. He says, "A minister who should go to Botany Bay without a call from the Lord and without receiving from him an apostolic spirit, the spirit of a missionary, enabling him to forsake all, to give up all, and to put himself into the Lord's hands, to sink or swim, had better run his head against a stone wall." So John Newton certainly recognized that this was not an easy role, and this is the sort of job that you must receive a call from God in order to fill. And they believed that Richard Johnson had that call from God. And so he and his wife Mary boarded the first fleet. He was 31 years old at the time, and they made the 8-month journey to the shores of Botany. When they arrived here, almost a week after they got here, on Sunday the 3rd of February 1788, the first service was ever run on Australian soil, where Reverend Richard Johnson preached on Psalm 116, verse 12. The verse says, "What shall I render unto the Lord for his benefits toward me?" Obviously, they saw coming to this new land as one of God's blessings to them, and the question was, if this is God's blessing to us, what should we render unto him for what he has given us? Richard Johnson did all of the normal sorts of things that a chaplain would do in a colony. He baptized the newborns, he married people, he buried the dead, he would go about his pastoral work every day. He would preach sermons in public and in open, because there was no churches in the early days. He didn't build one until later. I think about 5 or 6 years after he arrived, they built their first church. He would pray. Remember, it was a penal colony, right? So sometimes people were executed for doing the wrong thing, and he would pray with them when they were on the scaffold. He started the first schools in Australia, which is interesting because they weren't just schools for the soldiers' kids or the settlers' kids. They're actually schools for the convicts' kids as well. And he was a farmer. This is really significant because as a Yorkshire man, he grew up on a farm, and at a stage early in Australia's history, people were on the brink of starvation, and his farming skills came in handy. He became known as the best farmer in the colony. One convict's letter remains, and it says, "I believe few of the sick would have recovered if it were not for the kindness of Reverend Mr. Johnson, whose assistance out of his own stores make him the physician of both soul and body." So the people saw him as somebody who took care of the physical needs of people as well as their spiritual needs. I found this really interesting, actually. Counterculturally, he even befriended the first Australians. He befriended the Indigenous Australians. And when he and his wife had their first daughter in Australia, they gave her an Aboriginal name. He clashed with quite a few of the people, the powers that be at the time. Governor Phillip wanted Richard Johnson to preach morals and to preach, stand up straight and get your act together. But Johnson was much more interested in preaching the gospel, which is the good news that Jesus has saved us and he has made a way for our sins to be forgiven and for us to have a relationship with God. Of course, he recognized that that had implications for the way that we live, but he would not preach just stand up straight and stop swearing. He wanted to preach the good news. When Governor Phillip got sick and went back to England, he was replaced by Major Francis Grose. And Major Francis Grose did not like Richard Johnson at all, saw religion as having no place in the colony. And so he would encourage people to turn up to church drunk and to heckle Richard Johnson during his sermons. Even at one stage, Major Grose made it a rule that the only church service could happen at 6 a.m. in the morning and that it could only go for 45 minutes, which, as a preacher, 45 minutes is just not enough sometimes. But he certainly clashed with those people who were around him, and I'm sure that the work that he did in the colony was not easy, but he certainly felt called to this place by God. We have a letter left over from Richard Johnson, and he says in the end of it, talks about how difficult it is, and then he says, "I am persuaded that I am where God aims and intends me to be." And I think that's an amazing story of mission work in a tricky part of the world at a tricky time.